When I say monitoring to you, what do you think of? I bet you think of monitoring technology, whether it's physical servers or virtual servers, containers, serverless, networks, databases, APIs, applications, mobile devices, web browsers, all of these things, right? What about, I think as SREs, we need to monitor more than just technology. I think we need to monitor people and culture and process and even finance. And I'm here today to try and convince you of that. My name is Stephen Townshend. I'm from New Zealand. And for many, many, many years, I was a performance engineer before transitioning into this SRE world a couple of years ago. I am not at all what I would consider an expert at SRE, but I do share my SRE learning journey online and through my podcast, which is called Slight Reliability. I'm probably most well known for my MS Paint style artwork, which you're about to see quite a lot of. 8 months ago, I started a new role as a DevRel. I call myself a reliability advocate at a company called SquaredUp. SquaredUp provides unified dashboarding and visibility across team, tool, and technology boundaries. My role is to learn about SRE concepts and practices and observability, to create content about that, and to engage with the community. And more recently, I've been looking in open source projects which would be a good fit to integrate with our product. Have you ever seen a cartoon where there's a character and they're hungry and they're hunting for food, and they see what looks like a small animal twitching in a bush? So they go and take a bite of the animal. But it turns out that that small animal is actually just the tip of a tail of an enormous monster. Well, that's pretty much been my experience putting this talk together. I wanted to talk about 4 different things. Monitoring the other technology, not what we build and operate, but all the other stuff that we need to do our jobs effectively. Monitoring teams of people, the ones who operate our services, and the processes that they follow. Monitoring customer outcome and experiences, and monitoring business objectives and health. But it turns out that's just way too much to cover in 20 minutes, so I'm going to focus in on one area. Monitoring the teams of people who operate our services and the processes that they follow. And I hope that even with this narrowed focus, that it opens your eyes to the potential of this area of inquiry. So let's start by talking about how did I get here? Why am I talking about this? Up until 8 months ago, I worked at IAG, which stands for Insurance Australia Group. It's Australasia's largest general insurance provider. I was part of this SRE incubator team of just 4 people. We were learning SRE from scratch. We had no idea what we were doing at first, and our job was to take SRE goodness and apply it across the organization from the ground level. Engaging effectively with the teams who actually operate our services, we found really challenging. We tried different approaches, SLO adoption workshops, joining the on-call rotation. But the thing that we found got the most traction is something we called reliability benchmarking. So basically, when we worked with a new team for the first time, we would go in and benchmark the current level of reliability that that team is providing through their services. And we would use whatever monitoring and analytics data was available already. We'd compile it into a summary and share it with them. And we would focus on pain points that team was going through and opportunities of things that we could work on together. When it came to deciding what to benchmark, that's when things started to get interesting. So we started with the 4 golden signals, of course, because that's the SRE thing to do, and we didn't know any better. And then we added in another area for availability, based on request success rate. So already we had the basis of being able to benchmark the reliability of the technology. But then almost organically, we started thinking beyond the technology. Some of us have had experience with DORA metrics in the past, so we added in a couple of additional metrics because we were thinking about what are we trying to do here? We're trying to help this team to operate their services better. So how can we measure that? So we had a look at DORA metrics, and we got inspired by that and added in 2 additional metrics. The first is we looked at the number and priority or severity of incidents occurring in production. And we also looked at how frequently they were deploying to production. And lastly, our team ethos was that reliability, for the sake of being reliable, isn't enough. It needs to serve some higher customer or business need, so we ended in a very vague category called business/customer. I won't go into the details of what exactly we uncovered during this benchmarking, but if you do want to hear more about that, you can check out the talk that Gwen Berry and I gave at SREcon23 last month. It's on the Noble9 YouTube channel. What I can say is that from my experience, it was by far the best way to engage with teams about SRE. They were excited by the findings. They loved hearing specific things about their team and their services, and we found a ton of opportunities and pain points that we could work on together. So if you are struggling to get traction with individual teams about SRE, I highly recommend giving it a go. I took a lot away from that reliability benchmarking experience, but there's something that I couldn't shake. We spend so much of our time as SREs making technology systems observable. But what about other kinds of systems? Systems that involve people and process and culture. This whole topic of things we should probably monitor, but they're not actually technology, it felt like Pandora's box. And I could not help myself from opening it. In Greek mythology, horrible things came out of Pandora's box. I was lucky enough to be left with difficult questions. Questions such as, is the work that we do in reliability engineering having a tangible benefit to the organizations that we work for? And how can we measure that? And can we monitor non-technology systems in the same way we do technology ones? And does this have anything to do with SRE or observability, or is it just something else entirely? What came next for me has so far been a year-long and counting quest to look into this area of inquiry. So behind the technology, there are human beings, teams of people, and how effectively these teams of people operate is fundamental not just to the reliability of services, but to the health of our entire organizations. But what is it about people and teams and processes that we can monitor? Well, a big part of SRE is improving operational work. And probably one of the most well-known sort of frameworks in this area are the 5 DORA metrics. So if you're not familiar with DORA, DORA is the DevOps Research and Assessment Group. It's now run out of Google. They do research into and run surveys into what makes organizations successful in the digital age. They're probably most well known for their yearly State of DevOps reports and for the book Accelerate. Quite early on, they identified these 4 key indicators of high-performing organizations. And they are the frequency of deployments to production, the lead time between committing code till it's running in production, the rate of changes made to production which cause degraded service to customers, and time to restore after a major incident. And in recent years, they've added in a 5th metric called reliability, which I feel like some of you might have heard of before. My colleague Tim Wheeler, he recently went through the process of setting up continuous monitoring of DORA metrics internally at SquaredUp. And it's because SquaredUp as a company was and still is going through a process of constant and continual and rapid change, both to our organization and to our product. And Tim wanted a way to know whether our engineering teams were adapting to that change. What I think is really fascinating for me is how we had to adapt these DORA metrics to our unique context. For example, mean time to recovery. And I know MTTR has got a bad rap. I actually interviewed Courtney Nash for my podcast recently, and I completely agree with her. It's a terrible metric. We shouldn't use it. But I'm still going to talk about it for a second. So in MTTR, it's generally about recovering from a major incident. But at the time that Tim did this analysis, we had maybe 1 or 2 what you could possibly classify as major incidents in a whole year. So there wasn't enough data to have a meaningful metric or one that we could act on. So Tim changed our interpretation. And he said, well, we're not having major outages, but we are releasing constant change to production multiple times a day, And sometimes that change has a negative impact on our customers. And when that happens, we have a highest priority defect called an escalated ticket. So we said, how about we time how long it takes to get to recover from those? And that's been really successful. I think that taking a framework like DORA metrics and adjusting it to your unique context is absolutely crucial. It's key. And it's one of these lessons I keep learning time and time again since being thrown into the world of SRE. Tim says actually the discussions that we had internally about what each metric meant to SquaredUp was perhaps the most valuable thing out of the whole exercise. Because it forces you to think about what success looks like and how you can measure it. So on the slide here, we have an actual snapshot of DORA metrics from our own product from a particular point in time, maybe a month or two ago. And Tim finds that tracking DORA metrics over time is where the value is for him. Because he wants to know if we restructure the company or change some technology, how is that impacting our ability to build and operate, and vice versa. In case you were curious, to calculate the DORA metrics, Tim was pulling in data from Azure DevOps, from GitHub, and from Jira. Something else as SREs we should probably be, spending some time on is reducing toil. But how many of us actually go out and measure how much of our work is toil? Or what about across a whole team or across an entire organization? How do you measure toil across a whole organization in an unintrusive yet accurate way? Turns out that's really challenging. I was really curious about how other orgs are doing this, so I asked online, how are you measuring toil? And I think Steve McGee, who's the co-author of Enterprise Roadmap to SRE, put it best when he said surveys. That's it. There really isn't an easy, automatic way to measure toil across an organization. Shay Stewart from Runwen suggested you can add labels or tags to your ticketing system to give you some indication of how much toil work your engineers are doing. I think this is a pretty good approach if you wanted to have a small period of time, maybe a couple of weeks, when you really wanted to look into how much toil you're doing and what kind of toil work is going on. But I don't think it's a good long-term solution because of the extra overhead of time entry on the engineers. Which is Dom Finn, who I think he might be at the conference. He's a principal SRE at ANZX. Basically, if you try too hard to measure toil all the time, then that measurement activity itself becomes a significant source of toil, and it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So my dream of having this one easy to look at graph which shows me team toil or company toil in one place automatically probably isn't going to happen anytime soon. But it's absolutely worthwhile measuring. So you can still ask engineers to assess for themselves, how much toil work are you doing? And what kinds of toil work are you doing? So you can find opportunities for improvement. I do think it's important to clarify for yourself, what do you mean by toil? The SRE book has quite a long definition of it, and it's not easy to remember in one go. So come up with an agreed definition that you can all be clear about. My definition is manual, repetitive work that does not create long-lasting improvement. What about the more esoteric, but equally as important factors of human well-being and team engagement? How do we measure this? Probably the most well-known framework that I've come across is ENPS, or the Employee Net Promoter Score. For some reason, I've seen it everywhere I've gone. It kind of boils down to asking the question, how likely would you be to recommend your current place of employment to your friends or former colleagues? I feel like it's a little dangerously one-dimensional. A different framework is the Westrum organizational model, which doesn't look at engagement or well-being directly. It looks at measuring culture. And it sort of puts culture onto a continuum from pathological through to bureaucratic, and lastly through to generative. And you can actually generate questionnaires to put together a metric if that's what you wanted to do. I think the main thing is, it's not just about empathy and feeling good, although that's important, those are important. DORA research has shown a strong relationship between high-trust generative cultures and high-performing teams. So indirectly, how effective your culture is impacting how reliable your services are. There's many other areas we may want to look at relating to people and process, such as how over or underutilized are your teams, or how many dependencies do your teams have. So we want our teams to be as independent as possible, right? But realistically, there'll be other teams that they depend on to do their job. So how reliable are those teams? How many of them are there? How long does it take them to respond? Or what about the efficiency of our processes? Maybe an incident management process or a deployment process. What are all the steps involved? Which ones can we simplify and automate? I think that SRE is as much about improving people and process as it is about improving technology. So from my view, we should be trying to monitor all of these things. I had a vision of being able to see a single pane of glass view of an entire team and everything I'd need to know about them. But it turns out that you can't monitor everything quite as easily and automatically as you can technology. But some things like DORA metrics can be. And I still think it's worth measuring for ourselves how effective our teams are going, surfacing that information, because that's how we get better together. And as I said, I think that SRE is just as much about improving people and process as it is about improving technology. So if we don't try and measure these kinds of things, how do we know if we're succeeding or not? At its core, I think SRE is about two things. It's about designing, building, and operating reliable services at scale. And it's also about improving operational work, reducing toil, making it more efficient and effective, and taking this whole field of work, which is traditionally pretty difficult and stressful, and making it more palatable or even enjoyable for the engineers involved. I think that for the majority of organizations in the world, that it's actually the latter which is more important. I worked as a consultant for 10 years, and then in large enterprise. And you know what I didn't see? I didn't see organizations struggle to keep their services up and running. What I did see was how increasingly painful it was becoming to operate services as they became more complex and distributed. So that's my hot take, that for the majority of organizations in the world, I think the value of SRE is in improving operational work, not pushing nines of availability. So I opened up Pandora's box, and you know what? There's some nice stuff in there. And here I'm only scratching a small part of a huge mural of possibility. From my experience, most SREs that I talk to are technology-centric and somewhat inward-looking. And I think that is completely understandable. But if we want to achieve the ultimate outcome of SRE, things such as, yes, reliable services at scale, but also happy engineers, effective operations work, priority for ops and improvement work, great customer experience, and ultimately successful products and businesses, then I think we need to expand our horizons. If you are fighting fires every day because there's no funding or priority for operations or improvement work, you can't necessarily write some amazing code or install a tool to solve that problem. It's not about the technology system. It's about thinking about the system of your organization. Why are things the way they are? And how can I fit SRE into that in a positive way? I also see a lot of teams pushing nines of availability. And I wondered to myself, why are you doing that? Have you run some experiments to prove that eking out that 0.1% of availability is having a positive impact on your organization? And how much did it cost to get that? I think if we're too technology-centric, it's very easy to do work which isn't necessarily helping the customer or the business, which ultimately means we're not effectively serving our organization. Observability is fantastic. It's great, it's necessary. It is the only way to make sense of complex distributed technology systems. I'm not suggesting we don't do it, and I'm not suggesting we don't even deprioritize it. All I'm saying is that I think we need to be thoughtful about what we're looking at and what we're tracking to make sure that the work that we do in reliability engineering is serving our organization. In other words, to fully realize the potential of SRE, I think we need to look beyond observability. I'm not going to mention everyone by name here, but these are the people who either joined in the discussions online or directly reviewed this topic. So thank you to everyone who helped make this possible, as well as SREcon and USENIX and everyone involved in the conference. And if you want to connect with me, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn, or you can follow my podcast on YouTube or any podcast app, or to head to slightreliability.com. Thank you.